love, marriage, loyalty, hate, and desire, a tumultuous journey of human emotions. At the beginning, love seems pure, a promise of eternal togetherness, where loyalty stands as the cornerstone of every relationship. But as time passes, feelings can shift. The very love that once bound two hearts together can give way to resentment, the mundane turning into dissatisfaction, and desire spiraling into something uncontrollable. When desire outweighs respect, things can go too far, testing the boundaries of love and trust. The cracks begin to show, and the once unbreakable bond may slowly unravel, leading to the heartbreaking collapse of what was once a beautiful union. Join me as we delve into the complexities of love, marriage, and the fragile nature of human connection. Life has a strange way of shifting beneath our feet, catching us off guard when we least expect it. Not long ago, I believed I was living the perfect life, a devoted wife in what seemed to be a happy marriage. My husband, William, was my everything, the man I thought I'd grow old with, sharing countless laughs, cherished dreams, and grand plans for the future. Our relationship was once the embodiment of love and partnership, a bond one held sacred. But as time passed, the vibrant colors of our marriage began to fade, leaving behind a dull and lifeless picture. William became consumed by his career and his relentless passion for politics. What was once an equal partnership started to feel more like a distant association. His focus shifted entirely toward work, leaving me behind in the shadows of our home. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, as I sat alone in our once cozy living room, feeling more like a ghost in my own life. I spent hours mindlessly scrolling through my phone, playing Candy Crush, desperately trying to fill the silence that had grown deafening. I yearned for connection, for even the smallest flicker of attention from the man I had pledged my heart to. I missed the warmth of our shared moments, the laughter that used to echo through our home, and the tender looks that once made my heart flutter. More than anything, I missed the man who had been my partner, my confidant, and my best friend. But no matter how much I longed to bridge the gap, it seemed as though William was always too preoccupied, too distant. Then, as if by fate, the monotony of my life was disrupted. One bright afternoon, I noticed three young men moving into the apartment next door. They were in their early 20s, brimming with an energy that was almost contagious. Their laughter spilled into the hallways, filling the air with a carefree charm that was impossible to ignore. Thomas, Mark, and Kevin quickly became familiar faces. They were outgoing, charismatic, and always seemed to be in good spirits, a stark contrast to the staleness that had settled over my life. From the very first meeting, I felt a spark, a rush of something I hadn't experienced in years. Their playful banter and warm smiles stirred something within me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. Thomas, in particular, stood out. He was the quintessential flirt, bold, confident, and utterly magnetic. His playful comments and cheeky grins sent a thrill through me, awakening a part of myself I had almost forgotten existed. Our conversation started innocently enough. A casual hello in the hallway turned into lighthearted banter, and before I knew it, I found myself looking forward to every interaction. Thomas had a way of making me feel seen, appreciated, and, dare I say, desirable. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long that it almost felt foreign. The more time I spent around Thomas, the more I realized just how isolated I had become in my marriage. William's absence had left a void, and Thomas was filling it with laughter, tension, and a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years. Each message from him brought a smile to my face. Each conversation left me feeling lighter, and each moment in his presence reminded me of what it felt like to truly enjoy life. I began to join Thomas, Mark, and Kevin for impromptu gatherings in their apartment. First, it was all in good fun, games, casual drinks, and laughter that echoed late into the night. They introduced me to a world of spontaneity and joy that I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't just Thomas's attention that captivated me. It was the collective energy they brought, a sharp contrast to the loneliness I had grown accustomed to. One evening, everything changed. As I sat alone on the couch, staring at William's packed suitcase by the door. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Thomas, inviting me to a small birthday celebration he wanted to throw for me. My heart skipped a beat as I read his words, a flicker of joy breaking through the sadness that had settled over me. The thought of being celebrated, of being noticed on my special day, was exhilarating, especially since William had forgotten again. He was leaving for yet another business trip, his focus firmly elsewhere. Not a single mention of my birthday had passed his lips, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. As I stared at Thomas's message, a war waged within me. Part of me felt guilty, torn by the thought of stepping into this new world, while my husband continued to drift further away. But another part of me, one that had been neglected and overlooked for far too long, yearned for something more. I wanted to feel cherished, if only for a night. So, with a mix of apprehension and excitement, I typed out my reply. It was a simple "I'd love to." But behind those words was a longing for connection, joy, and a reminder that life could still hold moments of happiness and surprise. As I pressed send, I felt a spark of hope, a quiet whisper that perhaps my story wasn't over, that maybe there was still a chance to rediscover the parts of myself I had lost along the way. So, after what felt like hours of debating with myself, I finally decided to text Thomas back and say yes. Something deep inside me longed for a spark, a hint of excitement to break through the monotony of my days. Even if it was fleeting, even if it only lasted a few hours, I was ready to take a chance. As I hit send, I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, but I pushed it down, refusing to let fear dictate my actions. Instead, I slipped into my favorite dress, the one that always made me feel confident, and made my way to Thomas's flat. The moment I stepped through the door, I was greeted by the sound of laughter and the sight of a cake lit with candles. A chorus of voices broke into a rendition of "Happy Birthday," and I stood there, momentarily stunned. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly special. The warmth of their smiles, the twinkle of candles, and the genuine effort they put into the surprise touched something deep within me. I couldn't help but smile back, a smile that felt unrestrained, unburdened. As the night unfolded, that smile never left my face. Laughter echoed around the room, and I found myself basking in a rare sense of belonging. For the first time in years, my heart felt alive, beating to the rhythm of joy I'd almost forgotten existed. When the cake had been cut and the laughter began to settle into quieter conversations, I found myself standing in front of Thomas. His eyes held something indescribable, a mixture of curiosity, intensity, and vulnerability. My heart raced, a drumbeat of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long. Without overthinking, I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a release, a passionate moment that stripped away layers of sadness, loneliness, and self-doubt. In that fleeting connection, I forgot about everything, my troubles, my worries, even William. The others in the room fell silent, their shock palpable, but I didn't care. For once, I was living in the moment, unrestrained and unapologetically myself. That kiss ignited something within me, a spark that quickly turned into a flame. It was as if I had opened a door to a part of myself that had been locked away for years. When the night finally wound down, I returned home, my heart still pounding and my mind swirling with emotions. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in ages: exhilaration. I was giddy, my body buzzing with the thrill of stepping out of my comfort zone. Yet, beneath that excitement, a small voice in my mind whispered a warning. I was treading into deep, uncharted waters. Just as I began to drift into sleep, a knock at my door startled me. My heart leaped as I opened it to find Thomas standing there, his presence filling the doorway. He looked even more irresistible in the dim light, his smile carrying a mischievous charm that made my pulse quicken. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a packet of condoms, his eyes glinting with undeniable intent. My breath caught in my throat. In that moment, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. My mind raced with questions and doubts, but my body moved on instinct. I stepped aside, letting him in. and closed the door behind us. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and unfiltered excitement. It was a night unlike anything I'd experienced before, a night that made me feel truly alive. Thomas had a way of making everything feel electric. His laughter was infectious, his energy magnetic. He brought out a side of me that I hadn't seen in years, a side that was adventurous, spontaneous, and unafraid. As the hours slipped away, we danced around the room, laughing and sharing stories. It felt as if we were the only two people in the world. His touch sent shivers down my spine, and every glance he gave me made my heart race. I felt butterflies fluttering in my stomach, a sensation I had long thought was lost to me. When he held me, I felt safe, cherished, and undeniably wanted. As the night turned to dawn, I couldn't help but compare the vibrant, colorful world I was experiencing with Thomas to the gray, monotonous life I'd been living with William. My marriage felt like a distant memory, a dull dream that no longer held any meaning. Thomas had awakened something within me, a thirst for life and excitement that I couldn't ignore. With him, I was rediscovering the sweetness of living, the thrill of being desired, and the joy of simply being in the moment. But one night turned into more. Thomas wasn't the only one who captured my attention. Soon, I found myself entangled with Mark and Kevin as well. Each of them brought something unique to the table. With Mark, it was about adventure. He took me on late-night drives, showing me hidden spots around the city where the stars seemed to shine brighter. Kevin, on the other hand, was tender and attentive. He listened to me in a way no one had in years, making me feel valued and understood. Each encounter was a new chapter in this thrilling double life I was leading. Living this secret life was intoxicating. The thrill of sneaking around, the rush of forbidden connections, the sheer joy of rediscovering myself. It was all too much to resist. I knew I was playing with fire, that I was walking a tightrope between exhilaration and disaster. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop. Each moment with Thomas, Mark, and Kevin felt like a stolen treasure, a slice of happiness I wasn't ready to give up. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of my choices began to press down on me. I knew that the truth had a way of surfacing, that secrets like mine couldn't stay buried forever. I worried about what would happen if William ever found out, if the fragile world I had built for myself came crashing down. Yet, despite the fear, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. The joy, the excitement, the sense of being truly alive, it was all worth the risk. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living, not just existing. And for now, that was enough. I yearned for more adventures with Thomas, Mark, and Kevin. Their presence ignited a spark in me that I hadn't felt in years. And the excitement they brought into my life was utterly intoxicating. Each moment with them felt like a whirlwind, pulling me further into a vibrant, exhilarating world I never wanted to leave. The boys opened doors to experiences I'd never dared to imagine. They introduced me to a side of life that was spontaneous and thrilling, a life where wild parties, late-night escapades, and impulsive trips to the beach became the norm. Their energy was magnetic, and their attention made me feel young, alive, and seen in a way I hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. With every laugh shared and every wild memory created, the distance between me and my old life with William grew wider. Memories of us, of what we used to have, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the vivid, technicolor joy of my nights with the boys. Each evening with them was a celebration of freedom and vitality. We danced under the stars like no one was watching, sang songs at the top of our lungs until our voices were hoarse, and traded stories so funny they brought tears to our eyes. Those moments felt surreal, like scenes from a movie where everything was light and beautiful, and I was the star. Their compliments made me feel cherished, something I hadn't felt in years. I started experimenting with colorful outfits and bold new hairstyles, rediscovering parts of myself I didn't even realize I had lost. By day, however, I was a completely different person. I slipped back into my routine, carefully maintaining the facade of normalcy. I went through the motions, smiling at neighbors and colleagues as if nothing in my life had changed. But inside, my heart raced with memories of the previous night's escapades. My mind replayed our most carefree adventures, like the time we spontaneously decided to drive to the beach in the middle of the night. We spent hours splashing in the waves, building sandcastles, and collapsing in the sand with uncontrollable laughter. For a little while, those moments made me forget the monotony of my everyday existence. But the duality of my life was becoming harder to manage. When I was with William during the day, our life together felt like a pale shadow of what it used to be: quiet, predictable, and routine. The contrast was stark, almost jarring. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my world transformed, and I counted down the minutes until I could escape back into the thrill of my secret life. It was as though I was living two entirely separate lives, each pulling me in different directions. The more time I spent with Thomas, Mark, and Kevin, the more I realized just how much I had been missing. My nights with them were intoxicating, filled with laughter, passion, and joy. It was as if I had been freed from a cage, breaking out into a world that was vibrant and alive. Each moment felt like a gift, and I savored every second, even as a creeping sense of guilt began to stir deep within me. The truth was undeniable: I was betraying William, but it was so much easier to bury that truth beneath layers of excuses. I told myself that William didn't care anymore, that he was always too consumed by work to notice me. I justified my choices by pointing to the years of feeling neglected, of sitting silently in a marriage where I often felt invisible. Yet, no matter how many times I tried to convince myself, the weight of my actions pressed down on me. As my birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. I had changed in ways I never thought possible. I felt happier, more confident, and more alive than I had in years. But beneath the surface, a small part of me longed for the intimacy William and I used to share. I missed the man who once made me laugh until I cried and held my hand like I was the most important person in his world. One evening, as I prepared for another night with the boys, William came home earlier than usual. Panic gripped me as I realized the boys were on their way over for one of our usual parties. I scrambled to clean up and act normal, but my heart was pounding. When he walked through the door, I greeted him with a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside me. William looked exhausted, his shoulders sagging and his eyes heavy with fatigue. He gave me a warm hug, and for a brief moment, I felt comforted. When he asked about my day, I gave vague, simple answers, unwilling to share the truth of the life I was leading after dark. As he settled onto the couch, I watched him, guilt twisting in my chest. He looked worn down, disconnected, and tired of life. The man who used to light up the room now seemed like a shadow of himself. I wanted to tell him everything, to confess my frustrations, my feelings of neglect, and the secret life I had been living, but the words caught in my throat, and instead, I simply smiled and told him everything was fine. That night, as William fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message from Thomas. He wanted to know if we were still on for the party. My heart raced as I read his words, torn between excitement and guilt. I longed for the thrill of being with Thomas, Mark, and Kevin, but I couldn't shake the pang of remorse that came with lying to William. The weight of my choices was becoming impossible to ignore. I was caught in a whirlwind of desire and regret, freedom and betrayal, joy and sorrow, and as I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, I knew I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. I woke up to the soft glow of dawn streaming through the curtains, the room still heavy with the warmth of sleep. William lay beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful, his arm draped carelessly across my side. My movements were slow and deliberate as I slid out from under his arm, careful not to disturb his dreams. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached for my phone, feeling the familiar rush of anticipation that had become almost addictive. Thomas's text lit up my screen, and a spark of excitement danced through me. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. "I can't wait to see you. Just thinking about it makes me smile." The words felt weightless yet electric, like a secret only we could share. As I hit send, butterflies stirred in my stomach, their fluttering wings both thrilling and unsettling. I stood silently, surveying the room bathed in early morning light, and then moved carefully to the edge of the bed. The creak of the floorboards beneath my feet made me pause, holding my breath as if the house itself might betray my plans. Slowly, I dressed in the quietest clothes I could find, a soft hoodie and a pair of sneakers, feeling like a thief slipping out under the cover of dawn. The entire time, a swirl of emotions tugged at me: excitement for what lay ahead, guilt for what I was leaving behind. William stirred but didn't wake, and I couldn't help but glance back at him. He looked so peaceful, so trusting. The weight of what I was doing settled on my chest, but I shook it off. The thrill of my secret life was intoxicating, and for a moment, I allowed myself to drown in the possibilities it promised. The house was eerily silent as I tiptoed down the hallway. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, as if trying to pull me back. When I finally stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit my skin, and a heady rush of freedom coursed through me. It was exhilarating to break free from the mundane, even if only for a few hours. I felt like a character in a spy movie, sneaking away for a covert mission, living a life I could never share with anyone else. Yet, the guilt nipped at my heels, reminding me that my escape wasn't without cost. The walk to the boys' flat was short, but it felt like crossing a boundary between two distinct worlds. On one side was my life with William, comfortable, predictable, and steady. On the other side was the chaos and thrill of Thomas, Mark, and Kevin, a world where rules didn't apply and laughter echoed late into the night. I longed for the excitement that came with it, but deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in both places forever. When I arrived, the atmosphere was electric, as if their flat existed in its own dimension. The air buzzed with energy, laughter spilling out even before I knocked. Thomas opened the door, his face lighting up in a way that made my heart race. "You made it," he said, pulling me inside with an enthusiasm that melted away my lingering doubts. Mark and Kevin greeted me like old friends, their easy banter wrapping around me like a warm blanket. The night unfolded in a haze of music, dancing, and the sharp tang of cheap wine. With each laugh and stolen glance from Thomas, the stress of my life with William felt like a distant memory. I danced until my feet ached, letting the rhythm of the music drown out the nagging voice of guilt in the back of my mind. When Thomas finally pulled me aside, his hand brushing against mine, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us. In the quiet of his bedroom, away from the chaos of the party, our connection ignited into something I couldn't resist. His touch, his whispered words, the way he looked at me, it was all consuming. In his arms, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Nothing else mattered in those stolen moments. But as dawn began to break, reality came crashing back in. The morning light was unforgiving. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with the weight of my choices. The thrill of the night was still fresh in my mind, but so was the knowledge of what I'd left behind. William's face floated into my thoughts, and guilt coiled tightly around me like a snake. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, but the thought of giving up the excitement and passion I found with Thomas was unbearable. When I returned home, the sight of William waiting for me brought a fresh wave of remorse. He kissed me, his expression warm and loving, and I forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. I buried my feelings, tucking them away into the corners of my mind where I hoped they'd stay hidden. But as the days turned into weeks, the duality of my life began to unravel me. I became an expert at hiding the truth, crafting stories to cover my late nights and avoiding questions that could expose me. With every lie, the weight on my shoulders grew heavier. William began to notice the changes. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening, his eyes searching mine. I assured him it was, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. He deserved so much more. And yet I couldn't bring myself to let go of the part of me that craved the chaos of my secret life. One night, William surprised me with dinner reservations for our anniversary. The gesture was sweet, a reminder of the love we once shared, but it only made my guilt worse. As we sat across from each other at the candlelit table, I struggled to engage in conversation. My mind wandered to Thomas, to the laughter and excitement I'd left behind for this quiet evening. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, torn between the safety of the life I'd built and the thrill of the life I was creating. Walking home that night, William reached for my hand, his touch warm and familiar. "I love you," he said softly, his words filled with sincerity. I squeezed his hand, but I couldn't bring myself to say it back. My silence spoke volumes, even if he didn't press me for answers. As the weeks wore on, the cracks in my double life began to show. The weight of my choices grew unbearable, yet I felt trapped, unable to choose between the comfort of William and the excitement of Thomas. I knew the facade couldn't last forever, but for now, I continued to walk the line between two worlds, knowing it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The truth loomed over me like a relentless storm cloud, dark and unforgiving. I was walking a precarious path, fully aware that the stakes were dangerously high. Deep down, I knew this reckless game I was playing could only end in disaster. Yet, I couldn't stop myself. The thrill, the excitement, the temptation, it was all too intoxicating to resist. One particular evening, I decided to host a casual gathering at our home. The boys came over, and the atmosphere was lively and carefree. William, my husband, was supposed to be working late at a meeting, which gave me a false sense of security. I convinced myself that everything would be fine. The sound of laughter filled the air as we shared drinks and stories, the camaraderie masking the undeniable tension that simmered beneath the surface. As the night unfolded, the charged energy between Thomas and me became impossible to ignore. It felt like the room faded away, leaving just the two of us. Before I knew it, we were in the bedroom, locked in a passionate embrace. His touch set my heart racing, and for a moment, I allowed myself to forget the consequences. Then came the knock, a sound so sharp and jarring. It sliced through the haze of our heated encounter like a knife. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I froze, reality crashing back with a vengeance. It was William. He was home. Panic surged through me, electrifying every nerve in my body. I pulled away from Thomas, my breath hitching, and scrambled to compose myself. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts as I stumbled to the door, each step heavy with dread. When I opened it, there he was, William, standing in the dim light of the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of his gaze bore into me. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice calm but edged with suspicion as he glanced past me. I hesitated, caught in a moment of sheer terror. Should I tell him the truth and risk everything, or continue spinning the web of lies that had become my safety net? I glanced over my shoulder at Thomas, his unease mirroring my own, and made my decision. "Just having some friends over," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. William's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't press further. He stepped inside, and the air in the room grew heavy with tension. Thomas avoided his gaze, and I could feel the atmosphere shifting with every passing second. It was like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong move could send everything tumbling down. I did my best to engage William in light conversation, desperately trying to maintain an air of normalcy. But inside, I was unraveling. The weight of what I had done, of what I was continuing to do, pressed down on me like a crushing tide. Eventually, William retired to bed, and I felt a fleeting sense of relief. The immediate danger had passed, but the guilt lingered, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating shroud. I had betrayed the man who trusted me most, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my deceit was a ticking time bomb. In the days that followed, I found myself trapped in a torturous cycle. By day, I wore the mask of a devoted wife, smiling and laughing with William as though nothing was wrong. By night, I indulged in the forbidden excitement of my secret life with Thomas, Mark, and Kevin. It was exhilarating yet exhausting, the duality of my existence slowly tearing me apart. William, ever perceptive, began to notice. He became more attentive, his gaze lingering on me a little longer, his questions probing a little deeper. "Is everything okay?" he would ask. And each time, I would brush him off with a reassuring smile that barely concealed the storm brewing inside me. The thrill that once fueled me was now overshadowed by an all-consuming guilt. The lies, the stolen moments, the deceit, it was all too much. I found myself lying awake at night, haunted by the choices I had made and the fragile house of cards I had built. How much longer could I keep this charade going before it all came crashing down? One evening, as I was getting ready to meet Thomas, a message from William stopped me in my tracks. "We need to talk," it read. My heart clenched as dread settled in. Had he discovered the truth? When he came home, his expression was serious, his eyes searching mine. We sat down together, and he reached for my hand. "I've noticed something's been off," he said softly. "Is there something you need to tell me?" My throat tightened, and the words I wanted to say clung to the edges of my mind, unwilling to be spoken. I thought about confessing, about laying bare the tangled mess I had created, but fear held me back, the fear of losing him, of shattering the life we had built together. "I'm just tired from work," I whispered, forcing a weak smile. "I'm sorry if I've seemed distant." William nodded, though I could see the lingering doubt in his eyes. His grip on my hand tightened briefly, a gesture of reassurance that only deepened my guilt. That night, as I lay next to him, the weight of my deception became unbearable. I had dodged the truth once again, but I knew I couldn't keep running forever. The walls were closing in, and the life I was clinging to felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The following days felt like an eternity. The guilt gnawed at me, relentless and unyielding. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could no longer live in this limbo, torn between the thrill of my affairs and the love I still felt for William. One quiet afternoon, I made my decision. Sitting across from William, I took a deep, steadying breath. My hands trembled as I reached for his, and when our eyes met, I finally found the courage to speak. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. As I braced myself for his reaction, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I was ready to face the truth, no matter the cost.